Did the Mormons support the Union or the Confederacy during the Civil War? It's a question I sometimes get asked. More often, however, I encountered this topic through hot takes given from one side or the other. Either apologists arguing that the Latter-day Saints were always faithful to the Union and that Brigham Young and Abraham Lincoln had a special arrangement, or on the other side, critics that the Latter-day Saints supported the Confederacy, especially because they were fellow enslavers. Now, I hate to be that historian, but there's actually a little bit of truth to both sides of these answers. History is always far more messy and complicated than the popular memory. What is clear, however, is that the Civil War era was transformational for the Latter-day Saints and territorial Utah. It proved to be the end of a period of seclusion for the Latter-day Saints, where they were off on their own in the West. It signaled several developments that would augur the coming federal conflicts with the government, especially over polygamy and theocracy. And even if the Latter-day Saints largely sat out the Civil War, the war ended up being quite crucial for the Mormon kingdom. So in this video, I'll discuss how the Mormon question, as they referred to it, played a big role in the coming of the Civil War. I'll then talk about how the Mormons did and did not participate in the Civil War effort and their views toward both the nation and the Confederacy. And then I'll touch on some of the major developments that would have significant impact on the Latter-day Saints and Utah going forward. The federal government's interaction with the Mormons in territorial Utah played a crucial role in the road to the Civil War, which is why I get so mad when I read a lot of books about the coming of the Civil War that rarely mention Utah. The key issue for the federal government in the 1850s was how to govern all these Western territories. By 1850, there was more land comprised in these Western territories than there was land in the organized states, as you can see in this map depicting United States landholdings during this time. After their invasion of Mexico, the question of how to deal with these territories, and especially the people who lived in them, who did not fit what they saw as the general character of the American people, was a pressing issue. Now, central to these debates was the question of popular sovereignty. The 1850 Compromise, a collection of legislation in 1850 that really set the stage for the coming conflict, directly involved Utah. The primary architect of the Compromise of 1850, Stephen A. Douglas, someone who had lots of interactions with the Mormons back in Illinois and was actually one of the champions for the Latter-day Saints at the time, though that's going to change. He argued for popular sovereignty, the idea that all these people in the West should have the right to decide on their own their future, especially the future of slavery. And at first, following that compromise, the Mormons voted to become a slave state, with Brigham Young declaring that slavery was God's order for society, though with key differences, which I'll get into a bit. However, the Mormons ended up being a difficult case, including for Stephen A. Douglas and the Democratic Party, which is why some scholars call this ensuing conflict unpopular sovereignty, because while in general they wanted the people in the West to determine their own future, that couldn't really hold true for the Mormons, who they did not trust due to their practice of polygamy and their embrace of theocracy. And so the resulting Utah War of 1857 and 1858, maybe a topic I need to tackle in a future video, let me know if you're interested, put this topic at the forefront of the United States. Douglas and the Democrats, especially the Democratic president in charge, James Buchanan, wanted to prove that the government could still be strong enough to govern the ungovernable, even in a period of popular sovereignty. And Douglas argued that the Saints were so uncivilized that they were like an ulcer or a cancer that had to be cut out of a union, and that's why he justified the troops going out, something that the Saints saw as a deep betrayal. Keep that in mind later on with the later development. And so sending the federal troops out to Utah Territory in 1857 was one of the last things that held the nation together on the eve of the Civil War. Is the only thing that most Americans agreed on was that the Mormons had to be punished. It was really the last gasp for national consensus, and it brought to the forefront all these issues of how to govern the Western territories, which again is a crucial issue for the Civil War. Before I go further, just a reminder that if you enjoy this kind of historical content, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I do deep dives on topics like this one every Monday. I connect the past to the present every Wednesday, bringing historical context to understand modern day politics or media or television and so forth. And on Fridays, I pull back the curtains and talk about the historian's craft, either looking at classics and historical works, interviewing authors of new scholarship, or looking at the sources behind common assumptions so that you too can have those historical tools. And if you want to give back to this channel, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have chosen to give back, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee you get early access to the videos, you get little icons next to your name when you comment, and most importantly, you can feel good about supporting public-facing scholarship, allowing both me and my producer Anthony to dedicate the time necessary to put these videos together. I also recommend subscribing to my Kit newsletter, where I provide links and updates and announcements, as well as allowing you to keep track of everything I'm doing and things going on in the historical world, as well as my social media platforms, especially on Instagram, where I provide supplemental materials. Links to all of those are found in the video description. And please mark your calendar for Wednesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, which will be my next live discussion. I'll be chatting with the historian John Turner, the author of the wonderful biographies of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. We will be coming to you live from the Mormon History Association site in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I will be ending my term as president of the Mormon History Association. John Turner will be taking from me the MHA Presidential Seer Stone. So that should be a lot of fun. Mark your calendar and meet us on Wednesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, let's get back to the history. So let's start the Civil War period and that discussion of the Latter-day Saints' relation to the conflict by discussing sometimes the idea trotted out that the Latter-day Saints supported the Confederacy, or at least were in favor of secession, and they sympathized with the South. That assumption is typically based on three ideas. One is that the Mormons were enslavers, just like the South, so they aligned on that issue. Two, that the Mormons were in favor of states' rights. They wanted limited federal control, and so therefore they sympathized with the South on that. And third, that the Mormons supported Southern secession because they wanted to do their own secession. Now, as I'll get into, none of these really hold water. Not to spoil things, but the Mormons did not support the Confederacy. But I want to take each of those in turn, because they do tell us a lot about what was going on. Let's start with Mormons and slavery. So yes, the Mormons did practice slavery. Brigham Young declared that slavery was God's way of ordering society and that there was a curse placed on those of African descent. However, even as they defended slavery, they often emphasized that their practice was different from what they deemed the chattel slavery of the South. And there were some key differences. A slave status was not passed along from a mother to a child like it was in the American South. So if an enslaved woman had a child, that child would not be enslaved. Also, if an enslaver was wanting to move territories, they had to get permission from the enslaved before they took them with them. And there was also regulations placed on how to treat those enslaved. Now, on the one hand, I want to emphasize that there likely wasn't much of a difference of the lived experience of the enslaved in Utah versus the enslaved in the South. Slavery is slavery, and protections of the enslaved are rarely followed. And there's also plenty of people who did not agree with those limitations placed in Utah, and they wanted to carry on the practice that they had in the South. So I don't want to play too much into the idea that slavery in Utah was different. It was different. But what's crucial here is that the Latter-day Saints viewed it as different. And so therefore they did not sympathize with the Southern states seceding over slavery. And I don't want to get too much into this topic, but this Civil War was about slavery. It was about the Southern states trying to preserve their rights to slavery. So no, the Latter-day Saints did not sympathize with the Confederacy over slavery. The second issue was states' rights. Now, there's a little bit more truth to this for the Latter-day Saints. They were not a fan of federal overreach, and they also saw the Republican Party as their enemy because the Republican Party wanted an energetic, vigorous government that was going to intervene on moral matters. However, the fault in this idea is that the South wasn't really in favor of states' rights. That idea that the South seceded due to states' rights was mostly a later myth created by those trying to whitewash the history and overplay the idea that slavery was the true cause. Remember, it was the Democrats, Stephen A. Douglas and James Buchanan, who pushed for federal intervention in the Utah War. So no, the Latter-day Saints did not find agreement with the South on states' rights because the South was not truly in favor of states' rights. Then finally, there's a third issue, which has a bit more validity, which was the Mormons supported the South seceding because Utah also wanted to secede. And if you gave Brigham Young truth serum, he probably would have admitted that that was the desire of the Latter-day Saints. They wanted to be left alone. When they went out to Utah, that was part of northern Mexican territory. They were consciously leaving the United States. They desired to create their own kingdom. But, and this is a big but, they realized that that was unrealistic. What they wanted was a weakened federal government, not a disappearing federal government. They just wanted to be left alone. So yes, in an ideal world, they wanted the federal government gone so they could create their own theocracy. In reality, they knew that that was not real possible. So what they wanted was just the federal government to be weakened so they could be left alone. And that brings us to the Saints' view of the U.S. government during the Civil War. This is actually a good place to do a quick reminder of the terminology we use for the Civil War era. Yes, there is the Union versus the Confederacy, but that Union was also the United States of America, and the Confederacy were the insurrectionists. And so we need to keep in mind that dealing with the Union was not just dealing with, the government opposing the South. It was dealing with the United States. And the Latter-day Saints and Utah delegates and authorities like Brigham Young, at a very basic level, did still support the United States. The first telegraph line that was issued from Utah after the completion of the Transcontinental telegraph line in October 1861, from Brigham Young said this to Abraham Lincoln, quote, "Utah has not seceded, but is firm for the Constitution and laws for our once happy country." Note, on the one hand, yes, this is basic support. But there's also a key qualification there. He's not saying we support the current federal government. He's saying we support the Constitution, which fits into the much long-standing Mormon view of we are the true believers in the Constitution. The federal government is betraying those constitutional principles. And most of the Latter-day Saints were seeing the Civil War as a fulfillment of prophecy. You remember Joseph Smith's claim that there will be a secession, it'll be a fight over slavery. They said this is punishment for the nation for the wrongs they have done against the Latter-day Saints. So rather than really choosing a side and cheering on the United States versus the South or the Confederacy versus the United States, Brigham Young and the Mormons just wished for war. Brigham Young once said that he, quote, prayed for the success of both the North and the South in destroying each other. And he noted that after the war, there will be plenty of widows that we will take care of. A reference, of course, to polygamy. But what they really wanted was for the nation to be weakened enough through conflict that they could finally be left alone. This is their best case scenario. Heward C. Kimball, who was a member of the First Presidency, said, quote, "The South will secede from the North, and the North will secede from us, and God will make this people free as fast as we are able to bear it. The day is not far distant when you will see us as free as the air we breathe, and we will be ruled by our Father in heaven and the agents he sends and appoints for us, and this day henceforth and forever." And at first, it seems the Latter-day Saints got their wish because the federal troops withdrew from Utah Territory in 1861 as they were raising enough troops to go south. But soon things are going to change. Because after the United States finally raised enough troops, They sent many of them back out to the West. Remember, this war was fought in part over control over what's going to happen in these Western territories. So as many scholars have argued, like Megan Kate Nelson, who I've interviewed for a new book on the Westerners recently, there was a lot of interest placed on preserving and containing these Western territories, even if they don't have many major battles. So in 1862, federal troops arrived once more in Utah, and they established a fort not far away from Salt Lake City like they had before, but in the heart of Salt Lake City. And they name it Fort Douglas, after Stephen A. Douglas, the politician who the Mormons saw as the betrayer of their previous relationship. Importantly, there are no major conflicts between the Latter-day Saints and the federal governments other than the Morrisite War, which is a fascinating episode but should be understood on its own terms. Maybe I'll do a video in the future. The people who truly felt the brunt of the new federal presence was the Shoshone. The Bear River Massacre in January of 1863, the massacre of hundreds of innocent Shoshone men, women, and children, marks another key theme of the federal government during this time, the oppression of indigenous communities. And the Mormons were able to reap the benefits. One of the sad, tragic ironies of the Civil War is that the Mormons actually benefited from the federal presence of the federal troops because it meant pushing back on indigenous sovereignty, enabling more white settlement. And then there's the issue of Abraham Lincoln. You'll sometimes hear that Brigham Young and Abraham Lincoln had a special arrangement, and Lincoln knew not to get involved. And of course, you have some conspiratorial arguments that Abraham Lincoln read the Book of Mormon during the Civil War, which privately converted him to equality, which is what eventually led to the Emancipation Proclamation. All of that is hogwash. What we do see is Abraham Lincoln's pragmatic approach to the Latter-day Saints. And we get this perfectly distilled in a letter that one of the Utah delegates, Thomas Stenhouse, sends back to Brigham Young in June of 1863 after he met with Abraham Lincoln. Stenhouse asks Lincoln, "What are you going to do with the Mormons?" And this is how Lincoln allegedly responds. Quote, "Stenhouse, when I was a boy on a farm in Illinois, there was a great deal of timber on the farm which we had to clear away. Occasionally, we would come to a log which had fallen down. It was too hard to split, too wet to burn, and too heavy to move, so we plowed around it. You go back and tell Brigham Young that if he will let me alone, I will let him alone." A few notable things. One is there's a bit of an apocryphal nature to this, even though it's dictated at the time. There are some problems with the quote. Abraham Lincoln was never a boy in Illinois. By the time he moves to Illinois, he was an adult, but maybe that was Stenhouse misremembering and mishearing. Lincoln also uses this metaphor a lot, referring to the Missourians, referring to some indigenous tribes. So this is a metaphor that he often invoked as, this is an issue I want to deal with, but we can't deal with now. What this should not be interpreted as is that Abraham Lincoln never wanted to deal with the Mormons. He wanted that stump pulled out of the ground, to fall along with his analogy, for some pretty crucial reasons, because under Lincoln's oversight, there are some massive changes with the federal government during the Civil War that are going to have some direct consequences to the Latter-day Saints in Utah. So let me highlight three major developments during the war that are all supported by Lincoln and the Republican-controlled government that are going to signify the end of Mormon exclusion out in the West. You'll remember that when the Republican Party was founded several years earlier, attacking the Mormons was a key plank of their platform. They argued that we are going to destroy the twin relics of barbarism, slavery and polygamy. Now they are about to trying to destroy slavery in the Civil War. They're going to turn their attention to polygamy. But even during the war, they're turning their attention. In 1862, in the midst of lots of sweeping legislation in the summer of 1862 that fundamentally transforms the federal government, giving the federal government power to enforce these issues and rights that had previously been state issues, among all that legislation was the 1862 Moral Anti-Bigamy Act, which made polygamy a federal crime. Now, polygamy was illegal before that, but now this is strengthening that, making it a federal cause and putting an enforcement in place, though, as I've noted in other videos, the mechanisms were not strong enough, which is why they're going to have to pass later legislation. But what the 1862 Moral Bigamy Act meant, and remember it's passed during the Civil War, it's signed by Abraham Lincoln, was it was the start of the federal prosecution of polygamists in Utah, something that's going to dominate the Utah story for the next few decades. Second major thing was the creation of Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City, this new federal presence. And now the federal government is not going to neglect Utah, not set it aside, but they're going to see it as a desire and something that they had the power to enforce in Utah. So the end of Mormon seclusion is end. And with the federal troops coming out to Utah, they are able to enable more what Latter-day Saints would call Gentiles coming out, those who are not Latter-day Saints, because the federal troops are also going to help initiate and protect the mining industry, which means suddenly Utah is going to be filled with these people who are not pledged allegiance to Brigham Young and the Saints. And third and finally, there are several cultural developments during these years that would once again end Mormon seclusion. One was the development of the telegraph line. Remember, that's finished in October of 1861 and then strengthened over those years. And second was the Railroad Act, which they gave money and resources to complete the transatlantic railroad, which again is going to bring more people and make it so the Latter-day Saints are no longer alone. So through the Civil War, the era of Mormon seclusion was done. I hope this video made clear why the Civil War era was so crucial to the Mormon and Utah story. On the one hand, there's not any direct Civil War battles that take place in the Civil War, though Brigham Young, through his partial attachment and support of the United States troops, he did rally individuals to protect the telegraph line and mail routes, and there was the locksmith company that was raised. But in general, Latter-day Saints tried to sit out the war. They urged on the conflict between the North and the South, hoping that the result would be a weakened federal government. The opposite was true. Coming out of the Civil War, the federal government was much more strengthened than ever before, which is what's going to set the groundwork for the conflicts between the Mormons and the United States. I hope this full history shows that many of the hot takes on either side, that the Mormons were strong Unionists and Brigham Young worked with Abraham Lincoln, or that the Mormons were secessionists and they supported the South and their slave cause, neither of which is fully true, both of which have pieces of the truth. We have to understand the broader context to make sense of this. And we can also see how many of these myths are created later on for one purpose or another. If you want to learn more about this fascinating era, I have a book that I strongly recommend. I'll link to it in the video description. Brent Rogers' Unpopular Sovereignty, Mormons and the Federal Management of Early Territorial Utah, published by the University of Nebraska Press, is a brilliant overview of the interactions between the federal government and Mormons in Utah in the 1850s and 60s. I strongly recommend it. I hope this video made sense. If so, hit the like button, share with others, subscribe to the channel, and become a member if you want to give back. History has never been more relevant than it is today because it can provide context of this as well as dispel some of the myths that often crop up, allowing us to have a better perspective on the past and what it means.